Well, Michelle Hanlon, thank you so much for meeting with us this afternoon. Please start off by telling our listeners a little bit about how you came to be involved in space.
So thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here because I love talking about space. I actually am a lawyer and I was not initially involved in space because I could not for the life of me figure out pre-cal, much less calculus. And so I thought, okay, that's done. I, a child of Star Trek who didn't want to be anything more than the captain of the Enterprise, realized or thought, oh, okay, well that door is closed for me. And it was actually just about 6 or 7 years ago that one of my sons came to me and said, you have all this space stuff around. Obviously, we watch every space movie that ever came out. And I have all the sci-fi, Douglas Adams, best author ever. And he's like, I really want to do this. I really want to mine asteroids when I grow up. And, you got to figure out that whole property thing because right now I'm not allowed to own it. And I was like, okay. And it was just a really great time in my life to transition from doing mergers and acquisitions, really fun corporate law stuff, but to really go back to what has always been my passion. And so I actually went back to school at a very ripe old age of 50 and earned my master's in space law. And now I teach space law and also run my own NGO, which is focused on a lot of different aspects of space law.
I want to ask you a question about going back to school. So you were already a lawyer, and then going back to school allowed you to specialize in the area of space law. So was that an additional, like, how long did you have to add on to already having your law degree?
So in the United States, you get your law degree after your undergraduate. So you do the 3 years of law school. I did that. I graduated in the 90s, and then I went back for a year. It took a full year. It's about 9 months of classes, and then you have to write an intensive master's thesis. And that took me an additional 3 or 4 months.
That is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Actually, that sounds fantastic. So somebody can switch, and it allows somebody later in life, as you're pointing out, to kind of focus on a niche. That's great.
I think once you have a terminal degree, everything else is gravy. So you had all the prereqs that anyone could ever hope for. I got to go back to your initial opening statement about Star Trek. I have two questions. Well, as lawyers would say, I do have a follow-up after the first question, but Next Generation or original series?
Oh, original series. Yeah, Jean-Luc Picard is no James T. Kirk. I'm sorry.
So to quote, well, you've already answered that question. I was going to hit you with a Big Bang question. They would always go, Next Generation over original series, Kirk over Picard, things like that. So here's my follow-up question is, I always encourage the kids to watch these shows because they have so many great ethical dilemmas and things related to today couched in science fiction. And some people will complain about that, but I think that's the greatest way to help share with younger audiences real world scenarios. Would you like to comment on that?
Star Trek is a soap opera. It takes place in space, right? And instead of sort of battling, thieves around the corner, they're battling aliens or trying to befriend aliens. I agree. I think, Star Trek, the original series, was really breakthrough for a lot of reasons. It pushed the envelope an awful lot. I grew up actually overseas. I didn't grow up in the United States, and my mother is Chinese, my dad is Polish. And so for me to see the deck, with all the diversity, was so natural to me. And to think to build these, people who poo-poo science fiction poo-poo it as, oh, it's utopia. It was never a utopia. It was hard. We do, and this is what space lawyers do. Getting from here to Star Trek world. That's my job, and I'm teaching the next generation of lawyers so that we can achieve that Star Trek world and not that Star Wars world, right?
Right. Well, I always say Star Wars is mythology, Star Trek is science fiction, and that's a big difference. By the way, the joke is, when did Star Trek become woke? And the answer is, of course, 1966. So.
Well, because they do. I mean, I'm not the Trekkie that you are, right? But I mean, there's so many ethical discussions that come up in their episodes that when you look back on it, it really
So,
sets the
I mean,
bar.
if we just go top to bottom, it's politics, race, religion, gender identity, social norms. Anyway, I appreciate you sharing that. And that's a podcast unto itself. But let's pivot back to space law. As I, in my novice, meek minor kind of way, look across the terrain, I see a few major issues. I would love to get your high level take on some of them. I think we have to start with some easy ones. Management of the bandwidths of the EM spectrum, who gets what, when, why, rules for that. Second, obviously, debris mitigation. Third, we need a cislunar internet around the moon. And do you feel like that will be something the world will share, or is it going to be sort of US centric like the GPS and the Russian version or the Chinese version? And lastly, rights, mineral rights and ownership of locations, if not the moon itself. So I know that's a lot.
That's a lot.
I will let you decide in what order or which ones you'd like to answer.
So I didn't write them down, so if I forget one, just remind me. But you did start with the easiest one, and for that I'm grateful. We've actually figured that out, kind of, how to ration the frequencies and the orbits, right? The International Telecommunications Union, which is in charge of all of our radio frequencies here on Earth, the story being that at one point we were not all sharing the same radio frequencies, and we lost an entire passenger boat because they were looking for help, and everyone else who was nearby was on a different radio frequency. And so, at that point we were like, oh, well, that's kind of stupid. And we ought to fix this. And so that same organization was given the job of helping us share radio frequencies and orbits in space. And they allot frequencies by nation, and the nations allot them within themselves to different commercial entities. What they've done, and not entirely successfully, but it's a for effort kind of situation, is they have actually set aside frequencies and orbits for countries that don't yet have satellites. And that's a really important thing, because the last thing you talked about, mineral rights, it's going to be that same sort of concern. There are countries that are not actively harnessing space resources at this point in time. There's no doubt that they're going to be. There's no doubt that they are already reaping the benefits of many space resources, primarily remote sensing satellites. But nobody wants to sort of drag them along or anything. They just want their fair share. They want their fair opportunity. And so we need to continue to think about how we protect those opportunities for everybody, because the seminal document that governs space law, the Outer Space Treaty, the fundamental principle is that space is for everybody. And so we have to make sure that that's our general job, is to make that work. That actually goes hand in hand with debris. And you raised the alarmist thought about debris is, oh no, terms of disinfection, we're never going to get out of our orbit. Oh no, or the movie Gravity, where the station gets hit by, the spacecraft gets hit. Unfortunately, that alarmist attitude is probably the one we need to have right now. There is a scientist named John Kessler who worked on a theory a couple decades ago and said, if we keep launching spacecraft into orbit the way we are, and they're just going to start hitting each other and they're going to create debris, we are going to block ourselves from orbit. And so that was just us just launching stuff and having extra, old satellites up there. There's 8,000 defunct satellites on orbit. They're not doing anything. On top of that, though, humans are humans, right? We can't just sort of look up at the sky and wonder. We have to think, hey, I want to show everybody I can blow that stuff up. I want to prove to people that I can reach space and, create damage. And so, the US has done it. China has done it, and India has done it. Most recently, Russia did it last November. And again, this is, I teach a course on the geopolitics of space, and it's really that sort of terrestrial, pay attention to me attitude of, look, I'm a real space player. I can shoot down my own satellite. So what happens when you shoot it down? It doesn't come down into the atmosphere. It creates even more debris. And when the Russians shot down their own satellite, the debris field actually put their own astronauts at risk. They had to move all of the astronauts on station into their lifeboats because they were worried that station was going to get hit. So, in terms of when we talk about, a lot of people will liken the debris situation to climate change. Look, we are here and we need to deal with it and we need to fix it. Let's not talk about how it started. Let's not talk about whose fault it is. Let's just talk about the fact that this is the world we're living in now, and we have to do something to solve it. And we're just starting to actually do what we call remediation efforts instead of just mitigation efforts. So now we're just moving beyond like, oh, if you try and be responsible about your stuff, to no, okay, time to clean up after yourself. And so we're really hoping to get a lot of activity behind that.
So I have a question about that. I know you still have the other two topics as well, but you mentioned the idea of equity, which seems like we want to save some space in space for these frequencies, for making sure that countries who aren't there yet. And obviously we have a treaty that kind of says that that's what we need to do. But when you were talking about the debris, and we're thinking about like what they were willing to do and put their own people in danger, obviously they would care less about someone else's people. How do we account for the different values of different cultures when we're trying to kind of form what are going to be the ethics of a shared space?
So that's one of those hard questions. Pass. No, I'm kidding.
It's more philosophical, right? But that's the thing. It's the ethics part that really kind of like.
Well, and it's also the biggest bullies. This is the new high ground, and it's the two big. Whoever's the big shots. It's a Cold War, right? It's sort of a new Cold War without direct.
Well, yeah, just as I tell you, hey, you got to clean up your debris, doesn't mean I have to.
No, I mean about the anti-satellite operations. And
I know, but
the
just
supremacy, I guess, aspect
in general.
So what's really exciting about today that makes it very different from the Cold War is that the power of the individual. The individual has a lot more power today than they did in the 1960s. And that is because of social media platforms. That is because of transparencies certainly in the US government, maybe not in other governments, but also at the United Nations level. So I created an organization called For All Moonkind 5 years ago. And I became a permanent observer to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space within 2 years of that formation. That's me. Little old Michelle Hanlon has a voice at the table at the United Nations. So that is right. The kind of transparency I'm talking about. And that is why, this is not a Chicken Little, oh my goodness, we can do things. We have voices, and we just need to figure out we need to learn how to channel those voices. And so when I think about students in particular, and again, this isn't a blame game, and I've heard enough. Your generation has ruined it for us. Okay, I'm sorry, but now I'm here, and now we're going to fix it. And what the governments, the politicians need to hear the voices that say, we want to fix it, and we want to spend the money to fix it. Because right now the politicians are hearing the loudest voices for money, and those voices are not about space.
I would also add to your well-constructed thought that we live in an era where space has been democratized due to lowering, once it was only 2 or 3 nations, right, going to space. Now, like us, we have middle school kids that are building their own satellites. So that is very powerful, right? It's no longer a national program. It's, and I think people often liken it to civilian airlines in the 1930s, that space has now become economically viable. So the governments can withdraw a little, but then again, without regulation, I know we're in the place we are now pretty much.
And this is one of the reasons I love your program so much, because one of the things that I battle all the time is this perception that space is for billionaires, because the mainstream media, it's all about Bezos and Musk and every now and then Branson, right? And that's not what space is about at all. Or we read about these billionaires spending $55 million to go visit station for 3 days. Yeah, and that's what I liken to the 20s and 30s of air travel. Back when airplanes first came along, they were really, really expensive. And people didn't go and take airplanes to get from one place to another. They went up to go have lunch in the air, and then they landed. So does that sound familiar? It sounds a whole lot like Blue Origin, right?
Right.
So it's a really exciting time, and the fact that you have students who are able to put satellites on orbit, who have that ability, and harness all sorts of data from that. It really shows you exactly, like you said, it's the democratization of space. Space is for everyone, and space is accessible to everyone.
Right. Well, I know that Kevin had mentioned the other two, so we'll go back to that if that's okay with you. He'd mentioned the internet as, and then also rights and ownership. So what are your thoughts about those emerging, areas, of what's at the forefront of those?
So what I would love to see around the moon, the cislunar internet, is that it be provided by a commercial entity, right? And then they are able to sell to different governments. Of course, there are going to be national security interests, and so that's going to be our biggest roadblock. And under that Outer Space Treaty, our Magna Carta, it says, Article 4 says, the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. So we know that we can't, if a nation were to put like a military hardware, they can't. I'm a lawyer, so think about that language. It doesn't say don't put military hardware on the moon, right? It just says you're going to use the moon exclusively for peaceful purposes. So ostensibly, you can put the stuff on the moon just to have it there, I guess.
Sure.
And when we think about a cislunar internet, we are going to be concerned about how to protect communications. That's just a fact of life.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, ARPA started the internet, right? That was a government-funded activity. So I imagine the government will be there at the beginning, and the DoD will get their little slice of whatever tech and their capabilities. But that doesn't preclude, the internet, as you said, capitalism to fill that hole.
Exactly.
Real quick pivot back. Do nascent nations with no space programs, do they get little slots in GEO on their line of longitude so that if they ever do have their own satellite, there's a home for it? Is that part of what you were saying about we have to allot resources for nations that aren't quite there yet?
That is the intent of the ITU system. That has been corrupted. It has been, tampered with a bit. And, a few years ago, Tonga put in a request for a bunch of slots, which had ostensibly been saved for Tonga. And it turns out that they had sold the slots to a commercial entity. And so, yeah, so anything is easily corruptible, right? But that is the intent.
Right.
I will do the next pivot then when we think about minerals and resources on the moon and other celestial bodies. So Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty says no party to the treaty, and the treaty is between countries, right? This isn't a treaty signed by any individuals. Elon Musk didn't sign the treaty. It says no party may claim territory in space by sovereignty, occupation, or by any other means. Okay, so I think everyone would understand that to mean, when the United States put the American flag on the moon, when China robotically raised the Chinese flag on the moon, they weren't claiming territory. They were just saying, hey, we made it, right?
Right.
So then the question is, well, if you're actually extracting a resource, that really kind of feels like you're claiming territory, right? Because you're taking it. Well, President Obama signed into law an interpretation of Article 2, which says, yeah, we get Article 2. The United States is never going to claim sovereignty over anything in space. But we do believe that if you extract a resource from space, you can own that. That can become your property. You can use it yourself. You can sell it to your friends. You can sell it to the highest bidder, whatever you want. Once it's extracted, it is no longer territory, it becomes your personal property.
May I ask a specific example of this scenario you described? So we land on the moon. The moon doesn't belong to any of us. As soon as the astronaut takes a shovel of regolith and puts it in a bucket and takes that bucket somewhere, that's now US property. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly. And this interpretation is not, really dramatic because guess what? Americans and Russians and Chinese have removed rocks from the moon and brought them back to Earth and claimed them as their own. They haven't brought them, they've shared them, absolutely, but nobody has suggested that those belong to nobody or whatever. Those are recognized as belonging to the government. So
doesn't that open it up then to take advantage of some of those resources that could be profitable? So like I go up there, I have enough money in the United States versus say these countries who don't, we go up and we just start mining and taking all of this stuff back to where there's hardly anything left by the time, I mean, obviously that's an overstatement, but you see my point. So it seems to me like that becomes an ethical problem too. At what point do only those already in power continue to stay in power in space because they have the materials to get there and to take those materials?
So I always like to do two things. Do one thing. Let's separate the moon and all of the other non-planetary bodies, right. Asteroids, right? I don't think if there's an asteroid that I didn't know existed, and you, a mining company, have gone and mined that out of existence, I don't care. More power to you. If you've brought power back to Earth, great. If you've been able to move people beyond into deeper space, wonderful. But the moon is something special. The moon has been our neighbor for our entire existence. All of our cultures have had a special relationship with the moon.
It's like Antarctica, right? It's like Antarctica. It's a place that we haven't been to often. We don't go there a lot. We all share it. It's about as accessible as the moon is. It's hard to get to. And do you see any similarities with the way we treat Antarctica and the way we should treat the moon?
I do, and I love it because everyone says to me, "Well, we figured it out in Antarctica," and we didn't. There is an Antarctic Treaty which says we're going to share Antarctica, right? But guess what it did?
Instead of the waterway problems,
instead of determining who owns property or whose claims are right, the Antarctic Treaty says we know there's claims to property. We're just going to not worry about those for the next 40 years. So it is a great analog, but it's not solving the issues that we are facing right now. And so, when we think about the moon and it is going to be a while before we're sort of mining the moon away to nothing. But first of all, we need to be responsible. We've learned a lot about mining here on Earth, right? Let's be responsible about what we use on the moon. Let's conserve some parts of the moon for its physical beauty. Let's protect the history that's on the moon. Some of the human-made spacecraft that are there, and let's think about how we're going to share. When we have the model of the ITU sharing orbit, right, mm-hmm. Holding reserving areas, but it's not going to be easy. That is a really tricky question. And it's made harder by the fact that we don't really know what's there and what's the value of it. So there is a camp of who say we need to put the rules in now. Oh no, before people get. But the counter argument is, well, what if there's nothing there? Then we just have all these rules that have just stopped any kind of development. And what is very clear about the moon is we need it. In order to continue our development into an interplanetary species.
Yeah.
It is the place we need to go to figure out how to live with lower gravity. It is the place we need to go to figure out how to shield ourselves against radiation. It's a place we need to go to start testing equipment in low gravity situations. It's the place we need to go just to see what it's like not to live on Earth for 3 or 4 years at a time. And so there's something in the Outer Space Treaty called the due regard. What we do, any activity in space has to be conducted with due regard for the corresponding interests of others. And that is this generation's challenge. So in the 1960s and 70s, we were really concerned about keeping the peace. We were in the middle of a raging Cold War. And everyone just want to make sure that we weren't using space to rain bombs down on each other, and we didn't want our earthly squabbles to end up on orbit. And so we did that. Now it's this generation's challenge to take the next step. And as we become interplanetary, help us set up the guardrails to figure out how to do that in an orderly, responsible, and sustainable way.
Right. Fantastic. This is great. I have 20 questions, but I'm only going to ask one. What is, in your view, what is the most pressing space law related issue that you are wrestling with, or you feel like there's a lot of uncertainty, or there's areas for movement or progress?
I would say it's what you raised. I'm going to use an umbrella term: space governance. Right now we are really tied as humans to the way of life we have down here on Earth, and that includes categorizing and cataloging everything by country, by nation. I'm American. That's an American spacecraft. That's a Chinese spacecraft. We have all of these laws that were made by humans to help us interact more peacefully. But the way we did that under the Treaty of Westphalia was to create these states, these countries. And so we interact with each other under the umbrellas of these nations, right? Things have changed an awful lot. Now individuals can talk to each other without, traveling 300 miles or, across on a boat or whatever. It's immediate. When we go to space, as we've seen and we talked about, you have students sending CubeSats into space, and legally those are objects of whoever launched them, the United States, whatever, but they're your students. And so we have to realize that space is very, very different from Earth. And so fundamentally, I think we don't just have to figure out how we're going to keep the peace or how we're going to, share. We have to figure out what happens when the nation state goes away. We should not be dragging into space a treaty from Westphalia that was the only thing we could figure out how to keep the peace amongst ourselves. We're better than that now.
There needs to be Terran law, not American law or Russian law. It just needs to be
Exactly.
laws for all Earthlings.
Right, and it can't just be so. Space law is a subset of public international law. That means the law that is how states relate to each other. So we have to transform our visions of space from being a legal regime, which is what it is now, the Space Law Treaty, that's a space legal regime, to a place where humans live. And that's a very different kind of community, kind of building regulations based on community experiences.
So that brings to mind this question, and maybe it's obvious for most people, but I'm thinking about it, right? So before you had mentioned like, okay, well, Elon Musk didn't sign these agreements or whatever, right? So if these agreements are made between nations, how do we ultimately get private industry, which seems to be the way we're going to get to space faster and perhaps more efficiently, to also buy in? Is it because they're launching from the United States, they have to fall under that, the same way you said the CubeSat would be? It's United States property then?
Exactly. There was actually a huge argument when the treaty was being negotiated, and the Soviet Union said nobody should ever be allowed to go into space as an individual. It should always be the realm of nations and states, right? And the United States and its Western allies said, no, we got to think about a time when it will become commercial. That we're we have to recognize the realities of capitalism. So Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty says a nation has national liability and responsibility for any of its nationals that go into space, whether or not they were approved or whatever. If you are a US person and you go into space, the United States is absolutely liable for anything that you do. And I talk about it in terms of to put it in terms of, we can recognize if I am living in Vermont and I cross the border into Canada, and I'm just Michelle Hanlon, citizen, the government has nothing to do with me, and I go raid the candy store and steal $1 million worth of candy, and I come trotting back over the border, and I'm really excited. The United States will have to extradite me, because we have an extradition treaty with Canada, and I will have to face the music, and I will have to pay it back or give the candy back. but the United States is not liable. The United States has responsibilities to make sure that I get put where I need to be treated. In space, I do that exact same thing, and it just happens to be a US base and a Canadian base. The United States is absolutely liable for that candy. Mm-hmm. So not only do they have to say to Canada, so sorry, here she is, go throw her in prison, they have to pay Canada back that $1 million in candy. And that is the legal regime we're looking at right now in space. And as you can imagine, that is doing a good job of making sure that, you know, the United States is paying close attention to what its nationals do. Because if Elon Musk does hit station with one of Chinese space station with one of his Starlinks, the United States is liable. But by the same token, you can guess the absurdities when we have a space hotel. Let's say the space hotel has compartments that were built in the United States and India and Australia and Iceland, and you have a hotel manager from Bulgaria, and you have a tourist from Sweden, you know, and then the somebody who from the UK who is, you know, there to repair something, you know, accidentally hits the Swedish tourist with something built in Japan. You know, that's not in the US. That, you know, today on Earth, that would just be a slip and fall case in a hotel, right? You're just going to sue the hotel. Not in space. That's a diplomatic kerfuffle with like every country you can think of involved. So,
but what if a child is born in a space hotel? Well, how does nationality retained if someone, is it the nationality of the parent or one or more of the parents, or is there going to be a consulate? Will there be a U.S. consulate in space that you can run to?
Consulate. And, you know, this is actually not that far-fetched, because if you are in an airplane over the high seas and your child is born, you know, what do you do? So it will depend very much on the nationality of the parents and what the nationalities, you know, what they say. So I think,
well, before we get to the last question, which is always super easy, I want to talk for a little bit about For All Moonkind. We didn't get to talk too much about it. Share with us a little bit about, you know, how that came about and how you're just all of a sudden you're with the United Nations and you're kind of keeping an eye on that. How did that even come about?
So when I was in school and I started really just absorbing space stuff, I was tuned into a press conference with the then head of the European Space Agency, Jan Werner, and he was in China. And the European Space Agency has done a fantastic job of trying to build this momentum for what they call a moon village, right? And so he said to the Chinese counterpart, hey, come on, you have to join us, if only so that we can go to the moon together and take down those American flags. And of course he was joking. But I was thinking, I thought, well, that's a terrible joke. You know, why would you tear, you know, this is the first time a human being ever set foot on another celestial body. Why would you tear down like anything related to that? And then I realized, wow, you can. There's no law against it. You know, here we have national parks, we have historic parks, we have the World Heritage Convention, where we protect things like Stonehenge and the Great Wall of China. We don't have that in space. And the issue is, think about it. We know that you can't claim territory in space by any means whatsoever, right? So if the United States says, and it did try, Congresswoman Bernice Johnson was like, oh, let's make them national parks. Well, you can't, because that's claiming territory. So we need to figure out a way to protect this history without claiming territory. And it's not just US. Luna 2 was the first human-made object to hard impact the moon and any other celestial body. Luna 9 was the first soft impact. Lunokhod 1 were the first wheels on the moon, not our rovers. Chang'e 4 is the first mission to the dark side of the moon, far side of the moon, I guess. So there's a lot of history up there that we need to protect, because I believe your students have every right to see that actual boot print, and I don't want to see it erased.
Right.
That's really, really interesting. And I mean, I just love the topic just because, you know, when I work with my debate kids, we're always considering those both sides and those the parts that maybe aren't always defined so clearly by the law. And that's where the ethics and the morals parts come in. But our final question is always very simple. It's going to be for our listeners who might be interested. They might have just wanted to be a lawyer before, but now they're like, oh, okay, this is going to be my niche. What advice do you have for students thinking about going into specifically space law?
Do it. We need space lawyers. And you know, what's really amazing about space law is that everything we do on Earth, we're going to need to do in space. And so if you actually really like, you know, working with animals, but we're going to need to do that in space. If you want to work in entertainment law, we're going to need to do that in space. So I would argue, and one of the things that I'm trying to do is to make space law one of the fundamental core courses of any law school. The way we have law students have to study contracts and property and constitutional law. They should have to study space law because we are already inextricably tied to space in everything that we do, and that tie is only going to get stronger. And so I think if you want to be a space lawyer, you have a very, very exciting career ahead of you, because what's really the most amazing thing about space law is there's like 5 treaties, and that's it. So right. You get to make the law. This is not, I'm going to read this, the law says code, whatever. Yeah, you get to make it, and there's nothing more fun than that.
And space and cyber and AI have changed so much so fast. There's nothing, I mean, it's like a moving target, right? There's so much work to be done there because those fields are just exploding right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. I think you're talking to the Wolfpack. I saw that you signed up to talk to them as well. So I will make sure that we tell all of our talkies, as we like to call them, so that they'll attend. But thank you so much.
We're definitely inviting our space club to join that meeting as well. And those are the 5th and 6th, 7th graders. So
who probably had no idea that this even existed. You know, like that's exciting.
I have 2 of them that want to be space lawyers, so they're definitely excited. Thank you so much for joining us today.
That's awesome. This is so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.